The specific issue to watch for is on January 1, the sanctions regime on maritime insurance expands from any Russian flagged vessel to any vessel carrying any Russian cargo. That combined with the oil price cap that the Europeans are about to adopt is probably going to lock in at least 2 or 3 million barrels a day, and that's more than enough to cause that pump freeze. And once that happens, that stuff is offline for decades. Well, I would start saying that the Ukraine war is proving that boots in the mud are still absolutely critical. It's just that there's more pieces in motion right now, of which drones are part of the landscape. So don't write off Iran's ability to actually throw people at a problem here. However, I would argue that if we do get to the point where the Iranians feel this is a good idea, keep in mind that with the United States largely not present in the Gulf anymore, the onus will not be on the United States to do something. The onus will be on the Saudis to do something. And since the Saudis have the capacity to export crude to west to the Red Sea instead of having to go through Hormuz, the country here that's likely to lose a lot of its oil export capacity is Iran. So if they start playing that game in the absence of the United States, I have no doubt that the Saudi Arabians have the military capacity necessary to utterly destroy all Iranian oil export capacity. The Iranian military is designed to occupy its own country. I mean, you guys remember the movie 300, The Thousand Nations of Persia? That's actually pretty accurate. Even today, after 4,000 years of cultural unification, Iran is only 50% Persian. And the way that you keep all these various mountain peoples from rebelling is you occupy your own country. That's why they have a 1 million-man army. We have not yet gotten to the point where I think that the mullahs feel a serious level of threat. And remember, this isn't China where it's a one-man rule, and this isn't Russia where it's a 100-man rule. This is a rule of a religious class that has over 10,000 members. The degree of resistance that would have to boil up to wipe this government away is extreme. So extreme that we've only seen it once in the last few centuries. And that was when the Shah fell, and the Shah didn't have a 10,000 deep bench. So I don't want to say this can't expand to that. It very well may. But right now, I do not see a lot of lights flashing yellow, much less red.
When the war began, the Ukrainians had been preparing for 8 years, but preparing with very limited resources. And they had had a problem with the Americans under Trump because Trump had stopped all military assistance to Ukraine. If you remember back to the impeachment hearings, it was Trump's ability to blackmail Zelensky. That's where it all started. And so when Biden came in, he started the aid back up. And when the javelins started reaching the front line around last Thanksgiving, roughly, that is when the Russians decided, okay, we need to move, and the troop buildup started. But for the first 6 months of the war, the Ukrainians were hanging on by the skin of their teeth. They were completely dependent upon foreign tech and foreign equipment to make things run. The change in the math occurred in August and September with the Kharkiv offensive. And in 36 hours, the Ukrainians captured the city of Izium, which had been the Russian primary forward staging base. And they captured it intact. And in that 36-hour period, the Ukrainians captured more Russian tanks and artillery than they began the war with. More tanks and artillery than NATO had transferred to them in the war to that point. And then the Battle of Kherson happened a few weeks after that, and they got a haul that was nearly as large. So they're going to need the winter to do a lot of deferred maintenance and get this Russian stuff back into operation. And you add that to the 60-odd thousand Ukrainian troops that are training abroad on new weapon systems that are not yet in theater, and just the general advancement of the military quality back home. And by the time we get to the end of mud season in May, it's going to be a very different military on the Ukrainian site. We're not probably going to see a huge amount of maneuvering in mud season. So you can kind of split the conflict period into 4 periods in a year in Ukraine. You've got the hard winter when everything's frozen, where you can maneuver fine. You've got the summer when you can maneuver and everything is fine. But on the shoulders in the spring and the fall, when it's cold but not cold enough to freeze the ground, you get this thick mud in the steppe, and then you really can't operate with tanks. We get to the other side of mud season, the Ukrainians are going to have a couple 100,000 men operating equipment more advanced than they've ever had. and it's going to be a very different sort of army. On the Russian side, there's going to be at least 500,000 new men on the front lines, perhaps as many as 1 million. And by the time we get to the end of June, we're going to know whether this is a Sparta or an Athens situation as to who's going to win. Now, we will not be done by the end of June. This war is still going to drag on, but it will be very clear who's got the momentum and who is capable of striking the knockout blows in the long run. Another thing to watch for is just in the last few days, the Ukrainians have been launching some long-range drones several hundred miles into Russia. They will probably be able to get that into a degree of mass production by the time we get to May. And then we're talking about supply chain systems and logistical issues for the Russians, not just in Ukraine proper, but all the way back to the point of manufacture.
In Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, a young St. Petersburg student, Rodion Raskolnikov, embarks on a murder spree to validate his pride. His motivation.
Ukraine war latest. Zelensky warns Russia building up strength to prepare for revenge. President Volodymyr Zelensky warned on January 24th that Russia appears to be building up strength to prepare for revenge on the battlefield. It is obvious that the Russian leadership is preparing for revenge, is building up strength, but it is also obvious that the terrorist state must lose, Zelensky said at a news conference with Finland's President Sauli Niinistö, who visited Kiev. Zelensky didn't elaborate in detail on Russia's possible revenge, or why Moscow would seek to avenge Kiev. Russia faced a series of humiliating defeats in late 2022, losing control of areas in Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Luhansk oblasts, as well as the regional capital Kherson in Ukraine's south. The statement comes as Ukraine's foreign ministry warns Belarus against directly joining Russia's war efforts and helping it to renew its invasion from the north. This would further stretch Ukrainian forces, already holding the 1,000-kilometer front line. In a commentary to RBC Ukraine news agency on January 24th, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ola Nikolenko repeated that Russia appears to be trying in every possible way to draw Belarus into a direct war. Ukraine warns Minsk against any possible further aggressive plans, Nikolenko said. For our part, we confirm the absence of any aggressive intentions towards Belarus. Ukrainian authorities have been issuing mixed messages concerning Belarus' potential direct involvement in Russia's war. Andriy Yusov, a representative of Ukraine's military intelligence, said on January 21st that there was currently no threat from Belarus of a full-scale ground operation, its participation on the side of Russia. Yusov said the topic was part of Russia's informational and psychological strategy against Ukraine. The Belarusian Defense Ministry said in October that there were 9,000 Russian troops stationed in the country as part of the regional formation. Ukraine's Deputy Military Intelligence Chief Vadim Skibitsky said in an interview with Ukrainian media outlet Ukrinform on January 23rd that Kiev still does not rule out the possibility of an escalation from the north, but reiterated that, "We are also ready." Earlier in December, top Ukrainian defense officials, including defense